and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. My name is Kate Armitage and I'm your host for our discussion today. And I'm delighted to be joined by Tom Callow, Head of Insight and External Affairs at BP Pulse.
Hi, Kate.
Today, Tom and I are discussing the future of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, the wider benefits of electric vehicles and EV charging considerations. Tom, for anyone who is new to the world of EVs, could you just give us a little introduction to BP Pulse, please?
Of course, thanks very much. So BP Pulse is one of the UK's largest businesses in terms of electric vehicle infrastructure. We sort of provide charging options across the whole sort of suite of EV charging. So that includes home charging devices as well as charge points for the workplace, for depots, and we operate the UK's largest public charging network as well. So it's really BP's electrification business in the UK.
We're in this series of GreenFleet Talks, we've been talking about plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And we know from, we've all had chance to digest the announcement that ICE cars new registrations will be banned from 2030. But the consultation on the handling of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles is underway and will consider what happens between 2030 and 2035. So it's a bit of a grey area, I think, at the moment for fleets. In your experience, should fleets be considering PHEVs or should they be planning to switch straight to full battery electric vehicles?
So I think it very much comes down to the fleet and their vehicles and their duty cycles, quite frankly. So we saw as the taxation incentives between plug-in hybrids and pure electric vehicles were equal a few years ago. We saw this big push into plug-in hybrids from a lot of fleets. Some of the sort of very popular diesel models in the fleet market were quite understandably being driven quite high mileages by fleet drivers, but actually transitioning to a plug-in hybrid didn't really deliver what fleets wanted in terms of increase in efficiency, because you were carrying around 100 kilos of empty batteries under the car. We've seen a lot of fleets actually tell us they've actually sort of pulled back from plug-in hybrid and they're going to full EV whenever they can. But I still think there's a place for plug-in hybrids as a transition technology, as long as the vehicle meets that sort of duty cycle of maybe quite frequent short range journeys. A plug-in hybrid could probably easily deliver those fuel savings that fleets are looking for today.
It's a little bit counterintuitive, isn't it? That you may think, oh, well, I need a plug-in hybrid because I do longer journeys. But actually, you're right. Once the battery is spent, then you are just driving a much heavier vehicle around on diesel or petrol. Yeah.
And sometimes high mileage is confused with long distance, and actually a lot of high mileage vehicles sort of rack up that high mileage through lots of very short journeys or very frequent short journeys that are sort of all added together. And indeed, sort of looking at that transition again from sort of the plug-in hybrid driver to moving to pure EV, a lot of what we hear from plug-in hybrid drivers is actually the one thing they want, having driven a plug-in hybrid for a while, is more electric range, which basically means I want a pure electric car. See, most of the electric cars on the market today, pure electric cars, have a range of, let's say, 200 miles or more. And that's pretty real world in our experience. You could actually have a flat or a terrace street, a house on a terrace street, and be able to drive to the office and use your workplace charging point as your main charging point. Do your commute back home and back to the office again on a single charge, and then charge up at work again. So there's lots of variations in how you might make an electric vehicle work for you as an individual. And that's one of the key things that we try to talk to fleets about, is actually this difference in how you charge electric cars versus how you might fuel an internal combustion engine car is actually a benefit. The fact that you've got this balance of different charging types out there is actually beneficial for the grid and for driver choice as well.
If you have a fleet come to you that says, right, well, we need our car park to be fully electrified. In terms of public charging, how does that fit into this? Because you've got the option of workplace charging, home charging. Who uses the public charging? Do fleets use the public charging?
Absolutely. Fleets are a big user of public charging at the moment. They're already a big user of public charging in our experience, but also they're probably going to be, in our view, the biggest driver of public charging going forward. So if you think about the requirements of public charging and the need for it, if you've got home charging and you're the average UK motorist that does maybe 8,000 miles a year, if you've got a home charging point the chances are you will be able to, you may not do this, but you'd be able to do the majority, possibly all of your charging at home. We know lots of drivers mix it up. We know lots of drivers today do, let's say 80% of the charging at home and 20% of the public network. Even if they could do 100% at home, they actually still, for various reasons, do the extra 20% on public networks, for example. So we know there'll be that mix, but for people that can't charge at home, obviously public charging becomes very important, not necessarily critical, but very important, because it enables them to drive an electric vehicle despite the fact they can't charge at home. But also for higher mileage drivers, where they're not necessarily able to sort of only charge, say, at one or two places, that's when it becomes important. So, and we know that reflects what happens in fuel already. The average private motorist, tends to use the same petrol station over and over again. There's plenty of people out there, and there's probably people out there who have their preferred pump, their preferred forecourt, they always visit. But obviously, fleet drives are different. Fuel card users, for example, tend to be sort of more promiscuous when it comes to filling up at different forecourts across the country, because they're travelling around a lot more. So that's true. That will be true in public charging as well, where you'll need those solutions that give drivers access to more public charging points, and predominantly in the fleet market rather than for private motorists.
So you talked, almost all fleets will understand a fuel card and the benefits that a fuel card gives in terms of an employee being able to refuel and bill back to the company. How does that work with EV charging?
Fleets tend to want in our experience. One is they'd like centralised sort of billing and invoicing, so that's key, and that's something we actually heard years ago from fleets saying, look, we want to be able to get all of our public charging in one place with one single bill. We don't want to be flooded with lots of receipts from drivers every month having to reconcile those. So we brought out a subscription product in 2015 actually, so it's been in the market for 6 years now. That enables fleets to do that, enables fleets to actually have all their public charging on our network consolidated into one place. And what we're seeing now is the emergence of partnerships between different networks that sort of expand their coverage. So this is really similar to the principle of cross acceptance in the fuels world, where if you have a BP fuel card today, there's 3,500 forecourts that you can access through the BP fuel card, for example. There are about 1,200 BP branded forecourts. So that means, by definition, there's over 2,000 non-BP branded forecourts that you can use your BP fuel card in. But it's not 100% of coverage of forecourts across the UK, and indeed there is no fuel card in the UK that gives you access to 100% of forecourts. So we think that's how this market will emerge. It will actually be sort of selective partnerships between different companies, expanding their network coverage. And we'll be part of that to offer fleets greater access to more public charging points under a sort of a single account. And that fleets will definitely see that emerge more strongly over the next few years. If you actually can achieve a significant sort of market sort of access through a roaming agreement, why would you go and build more infrastructure? So what we really need now is companies out there like us building more infrastructure, getting more charge points in the ground. And I think what we're going to sort of some of the proposals around universal roaming will probably stop that in its tracks slightly and really disincentivize that investment in your infrastructure. No
one's going to use in their lifetime 100,000 charge points. So, why do you need access to 100,000 charge points?
Exactly, good. Yeah. I mean, there's fleets today that are quite capable of using, let's say, 30 or 40% of the fueling infrastructure as their sort of baseline. And we think that'll be true in public charging as well. It's very unlikely that any fleet would need access to every single public charge point in the UK in our view.
Quite often when we talk about the benefits of electric vehicles, I think we're all fully familiar with the fuel savings benefits and the emissions reductions that you can get from electric vehicles. What other benefits are you starting to see coming through? Where do you think fleets should be looking to get additional benefit?
So obviously there's the financial savings. We know there are those savings, not just fuel. You've got reduced sort of national insurance contributions. There's taxation benefits on both sides. You have capital write-down allowances for purchases of vehicles and actually purchases of charging points as well. For employees, there's obviously huge savings. Obviously we now have company car taxation above 0% for pure electric vehicles today. I'm finally paying tax on my company car. Haven't done for the last 12 months or so. But that's actually, if you think about it, it's made the highest mileage drivers, and therefore the drivers that are using the most fuel and therefore have the highest emissions footprint, they're switching them into vehicles with no tailpipe emissions. So that's actually a really good targeted measure, I think, to get those drivers switched over. But yeah, apart from those savings for the driver, for the vehicle, for the company themselves, there's obviously a lot of, if you like, sort of softer benefits in terms of the perception of that company. So consumers are increasingly looking at businesses and thinking, what are you doing to play your role in climate change and environmental issues? So whether that's around plastic pollution and reducing waste, reuse, etc. So I think it's a really good message for businesses to be sending out that they are transitioning their vehicles, whether they're company cars or vans, over to zero emission options. But obviously, there's also there'll also be increasingly, in our view, interrogation of a company's overall carbon footprint, and actually from a sort of financial or a investment point of view, companies that are transitioning and are greening will be seen as a good, responsible and backable businesses in the future as well.
And in terms of infrastructure, there are also grants that are currently available. Could you just talk through, in the short term, how businesses can benefit from those?
Sure. So there's obviously incentives around the vehicles. We've still got the plug-in car grant available for certain vehicles. But you've got incentives around the charging infrastructure as well, as you say. So you have a grant for the home charging devices that you might want the employees' homes today. So there's a grant of up to £350 available for the installation of a home charging point, which significantly reduces the upfront costs. So we've seen some businesses choose to actually fund the home charger for their employee and view. They realise, for example, that they can actually in what they'll save in that company car's fuel bill as a company. So that's over a couple of months. They'll probably write off that cost of the home charge unit in maybe a couple of months. So they see the benefit of that. Some do a sort of like a salary sacrifice type scheme for their home charge as well, or a salary deduction scheme for the employee, so they don't have to face that upfront cost in one go. So there's a grant there. There's a grant for workplace charging as well. So there's what's called the workplace charging scheme, available for sort of a limited number of charging points in a workplace setting, which again helps businesses, particularly in the SME space, get a good level of infrastructure in with a reasonable level of discount. And then obviously you have the ability to get a capital allowance on that as well. So you can get at the moment you can get this 130% sort of super deduction on the purchase of charging points under that scheme as well for capital write-down purposes. It's a great time to switch to electric. There's no point in waiting in our view for the years to come, because at the moment you've got a great scenario to play in.
Absolutely, and those grants aren't going to be around indefinitely. You mentioned the super deduction, the tax that came in April, didn't it?
That's right. Yeah, the first year allowance. It was 100% before, and it's just increased to 130% now. So assuming obviously the charge points qualify under that scheme, but that's a new addition that the government announced recently. Yeah.
So it's another good reason to revisit plans for workplace infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And just kind of my last question for you, Tom, is you've built a really strong kind of case for electrification, and you could walk away and think, well, why isn't everyone driving around in electric vehicles today? Which they're not. What are you still hearing from your customers in terms of what the big concerns are, and what would you say to those customers? The
first thing I would say is we're still largely a supply constrained market. So you're still. I mean, I've got a electric company car on order at the moment, and I'm waiting several months for that vehicle. It's not sat somewhere in a showroom available to go and pick up straight away, sort of thing. So there's already a slight supply limitation on the growth of the market already. But in terms of the challenges that people are facing, in terms of things that the fleets and drivers also are raising as issues, we still see these questions around sort of overall vehicle cost or purchase price or lease price being an issue. But actually, as soon as you get into the total cost of ownership, the monthly cost of ownership, that tends to actually fall away because people realise the savings they can make. But there is also obviously a question around charging infrastructure still. We don't sort of deny that. We don't think it's right to sort of pretend that there aren't these concerns around charging infrastructure. But more and more what we're finding is that those concerns around charging infrastructure are more perceived than real. So there's a perception, for example, there's not enough infrastructure. There's a perception that infrastructure is, not particularly fast, or it's not actually in the places you might need it. And increasingly that's not the case. So there's a big job to do in terms of education, and that's consumer education as much as it is fleet education, to actually show, where this charging infrastructure is. It's out there, it's available, it's probably in your town, you may not have seen it. I have a an analogy I use a lot, which is, I don't wear glasses. I don't know where my local opticians is, but I assume my town has one. And I'm sure that if I get to the point where someone says you need glasses, I'll find where the opticians is. And from that moment on, I will always know. It just won't, I'll never have to think about it again. And the same is often true with charging. Once you know where it is, it's not a stress anymore. It's not a hassle anymore. So there's a big education to do around the ease of being able to use some of this infrastructure as well. I still see comments saying, you have to have accounts, you have to have loads of RFID cards or subscriptions. It's just simply not true. So we've already got a system, and this is in law, there's regulations around it that mean that every public charging point that you or I use has to be accessible to us, there and then at the point we want to use it, without having any pre-existing registration or account with that company. So we enable that through contactless payment terminals on our rapid and ultra-fast chargers. So you simply tap a payment device, payment card or other device on the unit to start the charge if you want to. You obviously can use a subscription if you want to as a choice. And on our slower charging points, we currently have a sort of what we call a guest checkout type solution where it's no more difficult than buying something from, the Argos website or something, in terms of just putting it in your basket and saying buy. You don't have to have an account. Again, you can have an account similar to a retail website. You can have an account and sign in, but you don't have to have that. So there's all these improvements that have been made in public charging over the last 3-4 years, I think have gone largely unnoticed. And we as a sector have been busy, beavering away, trying to make more infrastructure, more reliable and more easy to use for the fleet adoption of tomorrow.
Great, thank you, Tom. So we just need to challenge some of those misconceptions and really kind of double down on the education. And it highlights what you've said, Tom, really highlights the speed of change in this market. So a decision that was made 2 years ago that it's not right for me, come back, have another look, because the vehicles have moved on, the choice has improved, the infrastructure, as you say, has grown, accessibility is getting better. So it's all really encouraging, but it's our job to really educate as many people as possible about what's going on.
Absolutely agree. The stories you might read in the media from a couple of years ago are probably already out of date in terms of the information in there and the statistics. There was a reliability level, for example, availability level on public charging infrastructure in the UK is something like 85%. Back in 2017, and if you look at the ZapMap figures from 2020, that had already risen to I think 95 or 96%. And so the industry's done that improvement in that period. I mean, there are real challenges. There are, it's not all misperception. There are still real challenges, and there are real issues that drivers face. One of the things over that period from 2017, for example, to 2020, is that there's really been no improvement, for example, in motorway service area charging. So that has to change. To give fleets confidence. There needs to be, better charging infrastructure at motorway service areas. There needs to be much, much more of it, and it needs to be much more reliable than it is today. It's constantly at the bottom of all of the rankings when it comes to consumer experience and satisfaction. So that has to change to enable fleet adoption. It has to change very, very fast.
Okay, and I think I agree with you. It's regularly commented on. We know that there have been some announcements recently from government in terms of investment on the strategic road network. Plus, there's been some movement in terms of private investment as well that we're going to see coming through this year. So hopefully, when you and I speak in 12 months' time, we can sing a really great story about what the motorway service areas are doing as well, and I'm sure BP Pulse will have a role to play in that, very much so, on their forecourts. So thank you very much, Tom, for your thoughts and comments this morning. Extremely interesting. The pace of electrification is definitely increasing, and it's great to see BP Pulse leading the way in the development of EV charging solutions and public charging infrastructure. And it's clear from what you said that there is a wide range of considerations and tools that businesses need to think about in making this transition to EVs easier. That is about all we've got time for. Thank you again, Tom, for joining GreenFleet Talks. Thank you for watching. Please tune in to GreenFleet 365 again soon.